Today, I have the legend himself, Mr. Steve Toth, with me, the founder of AI Notebook, SEO Notebook, one of the most prominent SEO newsletters in the industry. Steve, thank you for taking out the time. What are you most excited about right now with the industry?
Well, thanks for having me, Jabez. In terms of excitement, I mean, it's a week by week thing, right? We're seeing really great results for our clients in terms of not only super high qualified traffic, but traffic that closes faster, traffic where deals come more educated to the business, not just less traffic overall, but when that self-attribution comes and we look at the quality of the leads coming from AI, it's super exciting. And I think that our clients are also taking notice of their own search habits changing. And there's just a ton of interest in the markets. I'm getting to work with some big brands, amazing clients, and seeing those results translate through is really what's motivating. But on a week by week basis, I mean, every time Claude says that it's going to refresh, I'm excited to see what's happening. And seems to be on a daily basis. So yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of things.
What, according to you, are the top 3 ranking factors in the LLM ranking space right now?
And your awareness inside people's minds is almost translating into the awareness inside the LLMs to a degree. So we've seen LLMs prefer certain brands and even search out, if you ask for best project management software, the fan outs are now related to very strong brands and things like that. I think that's incredibly important. Just your overall branding efforts, then that can be reflected in your branded search, your link profile, how many direct visits you get, correlational factors. But I think your overall brand presence and your mention presence is huge, and your co-citation within your space. Third party mentions, obviously, sites like Reddit or niche specific sites, hugely important in validating that third party presence. And then we're also seeing, depending on the prompt set that you're tracking, third-party sites being incredibly important in terms of shaping and recommending who you are, your claims, for example, whether your software is easy to use. It's not enough for you to just say that on your site. Other people have to be saying those same claims as well. And then let's say third, just your overall SEO, right? So how well are you ranking for those fan out queries? How often is the LLMs deciding that your passage supports its reasoning journey, and just your traditional SEO giving you a chance to rank better for those fan outs and get in that citation and that mention? So I'd say those are my top sort of 3.
Totally. You mentioned branding. Is that same as building consensus?
Yeah, consensus is an interesting one for sure. So Google wants generally a consensus on facts. So, if you ask it which invoice software has the best reputation for being easy to use for novice, for example, there's a consensus on that it would be FreshBooks, right? So FreshBooks kind of geared towards the non-accountant, freelance business owner, and prioritizing ease of use. There's hundreds of, if not thousands of articles or passages or snippets around the web that talk about that. So there's a consensus around that. You also can think about consensus in terms of just the facts and things that you write about, right? So many years ago, Google released a blog on their blog, The Keyword, that talked about how consensus is now used for featured snippets. There was a time where featured snippets could just be worded perfectly, but not actually be factual and have that academic consensus or that SERP consensus. With the optimization for featured snippets being very similar to the optimization for AI overviews, there's almost a fact checking that can be done to improve your ranking so that you're not way off the academic consensus. Sometimes there are SERPs that deserve different perspectives. So it depends basis, but I would say that, if you're a scientific journal saying that the earth is flat, you're probably not going to rank.
Right. And do you think consensus in general is being considered across all major LLMs as a prominent ranking factor?
The LLM has its embeddings that will lean towards an answer being one way, right? So if you ask it a question and no web connected, for example, it's going to generally answer with the same answer, right? Depending from model to model, but it's generally going to answer in the same answer. And that's also determined in which sources, the corpus it prioritizes, right? So it's
Yeah.
going to prioritize seed sites closer to the center of the web. So think about like Wikipedia and major news sites and things like that. It's going to trust those sources a little bit more in the training and all the pre-training that it does as well. So the consensus, I think, is not going to be 100% accurate when it's just the model you're asking with no web, but that's sort of corroborated by what it finds when it combines its own reasoning and what's on the web too. I think that it's not practical for an LLM to be fact checking every last thing, but if it has its answer and it's easily corroborated by a passage, I think that's a more efficient way for it to get pretty close. But LLMs are always going to have that disclaimer that they can make mistakes.
Yeah. Do you do sentiment analysis before working on a campaign?
Yeah, we check to see what claims there are about a brand and what is favorable to our client, right? So if our client really wants to be known for having the most strict compliance security measures or different things like that, like we want to know how the LLM is describing them, right? And we want to
Yeah.
know what claims they want to have the LLMs reinforce because we know that those affect buying decisions, right? So if you're wanting to change that, you literally need to just disseminate semantic triples across the web. Don't worry about links. Just get those semantic triples that say FreshBooks has SOC 2 compliance and has all these other standards or what I'm using FreshBooks as an example, but has all these different compliance measures and things like that in a declarative way across the web on ideally authoritative sites and look to change that sentiment, right? So it's not just about ranking, right? A lot of people especially early on, like last year, I'm seeing this changing slowly but surely as people like myself and others talk about that, LLM is not just about ranking for best project management software, but also reinforcing the buyer who already knows its shortlist. So that's where sentiment can play like a huge part in
Yeah.
convert, right? Because you want to be able to reinforce the things that are important to that person. And at the baseline of a campaign, it's really important to understand where are you starting, right? What does the LLM know about you? Where is the training corpus super strong and really putting your key differentiators and reinforcing those? And where are the areas where your competitors are the ones being mentioned for the things that you want to, and how do you change that?
What do you mean by reinforcing what the buyer already knows about the brand?
Yeah. So in B2B, for example, B2B SaaS, which is an area that we focus a lot at Notebook Agency when it comes to answer engine optimization, is that the buyer, it has a high switching cost for the tool that they're going to buy, right? So if
Yeah.
you're adopting a new CRM, it's not like buying a pair of running shoes that you can just buy another one in 6 months and don't worry
Mm.
about that decision, right? You're getting entrenched. You're putting all of your data in there. You're making it a core part of your staff. You're getting potentially hundreds of people on your sales team using it, et cetera, right? So companies have had now decades, at least 1.5 decades, that social media, and we've all had smartphones and things like that to do a lot of branding and make the market aware that when it comes to CRM, there's Salesforce, there's HubSpot, and maybe a few others, right? That are really enterprise. And when the user is already brand aware of the market, ranking best CRM is really not even going to attract that much of a qualified buyer. The buyer who is going to have the most long lifetime, highest LTV lifetime value is the one that has used a CRM and doesn't like the other one, or is coming into a new company and that's one of their mandates because they've had experience previously and things like that, right? So they know that there are certain features that they want. They want to know what's the consensus of what people are saying about the strengths or weaknesses of a certain product. And they're looking for LLMs to reinforce the things that they've heard, right? I think people are still going to trust peer-to-peer recommendations, but it's not possible to get a peer-to-peer recommendation. And the closest thing that we have to that is the LLM. And the more that use and trust and benefit from their LLMs, the more it feels like a personal recommendation. So we might even see that change over time where personal recommendations from the network become maybe the same, or maybe LLMs become, even more trusted as time goes on. We'll see.
I recently came across a scenario. I was just doing some testings for a query. There was a brand that was recommended, but there was a disclaimer given in ChatGPT that this particular brand has great coverage, but has mixed reviews across Reddit. So there's a negative sentiment there. How would you suggest going about and fixing this kind of negative sentiment in a situation like this?
Yeah. So, I mean, we do recommend that our clients engage in Reddit, and we surface those opportunities for them as much as possible, right? But it can't be salesy. It has to just be
Yeah.
factual, helpful, right? Engaging, right? No expectation of trying to sell, but just trying to clarify, right? And obviously, like, it can't be the only thing that they do either, right? So I think it can be very frustrating at times too, because you might even have a Reddit thread that is locked that you can't
Yeah.
comment on. And it's
Yeah.
like 2 years ago, and it's saying that you don't have something when you've shipped that feature now. So
Yeah.
there's some incredibly frustrating situations that we find ourselves in sometimes. Digging out of that hole can be possible by engaging, but sometimes it's a wait and see, and maybe it's a replacement by something that is more current, more topical, and more fresh, right? Going into Reddit without the expectation of trying to sell, but just trying to be helpful can change the tide, but there's a lot of it depends in terms of the timeline of effectiveness.
And do you think if clients or brands are not able to fix or engage on that particular Reddit thread, but they publish press releases or articles stating that this particular issue that we've had has now been fixed or we've upgraded our services, can that soften that negative sentiment?
Yeah. So that's a great tactic, right? I think press releases can help, but there can also be kind of come and gone too, right? So it would require that consistency if that was the method. But if that press release was, actually getting cited by other companies talking about this new feature, or finally, my favorite software supports the thing that I needed, and that becomes a discussion forum. And then that translates into reviews that talk about that you have that right now and all those things. That is something that can change the tide. But I would at the same time say that if Reddit is consistently getting cited for that, you have to update. You have to put that information on Reddit as well, and comment on those threads where you're able to, or even start new threads that talk about that this feature is now a thing and no longer a so-called deal breaker for that buying decision.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. What's your general audit process like whenever you get a new client? What are the main things that you look into?
Yeah, great questions. We want to first discern where the client stands in the LLM, right? So start with basically an interview with the client to ask a bunch of detailed questions about their positioning, what they know about their competition, how they speak about the company internally, what has been the updates to the brand in the last year, where are the updates going in terms of their focus, and kind of starting there, and then seeing how much the LLMs have picked up, how they're thinking about their product in terms of their positioning, or if that's changed as well. That can also be challenging. So it's definitely a customized thing. But then we want to interrogate the LLMs to see for those key buying decision, deal breaker type of questions, how are they being represented? We also want to know, of course, for non-branded prompts, whether or not they're being cited, and how also their co-citation is on the web when it comes to their competitors. Are they in the key listicles that are influencing and getting cited? Are they being mentioned alongside companies when people are asking for recommendations and things like that? And then seeing how that translates to their share of voice, so to speak, on LLMs. But we also take that as directional data, because we don't have search volume for LLM searches, right? So we can only kind of take what we see in Google Search Console, in Hrefs, question-based keywords and things like that, and assume that people are asking the LLMs that. But then at the same time, we also know that it's not just that initial question where the decision is made, it's the subsequent chat, right? So some of the time, Is we also run a user journey simulation, right? So according to the client's goals, what would be some follow-up questions that they ask after those initial Google type sourced questions, and then actually seeing, how they're recommended for those key deal breakers along that simulation journey.
And you've worked with many brands. Let's take an example of FreshBooks. If FreshBook comes to you and they offer multiple service invoicing for designers, invoicing for artists, and many other categories, and the client says, I want to rank for all 5 or all 10 categories. How do you decide which category they can actually go for? Or do you plan, no, okay, you want to rank for 10 categories, we'll start working on 10 categories?
Yeah. Well, every company is going to have its strengths, right? And I
Mm,
think your reviews online and even the spaces that you're discussed can influence where you're going to be strong, right? So FreshBooks has a very strong imprint with freelancers, right? But when it comes to 1,000-person company or a large agency, we know that they just don't have that type of a customer. And one of the dilemmas with FreshBooks, like frankly, is that when a company grows too big, their accountant always says switch to QuickBooks because that's what I use. But when it comes to
mm,
the freelancer who is even sending their own invoices or needs that easy to use interface, they absolutely love FreshBooks for that, right? So there's going to be some areas where you have to be very real with your client to say, we're going up against a company that has thousands of reviews that are talking about a demographic that I'm sure you'd love to get into, but you're much more wise to double down here. Right. Or let's say, for example, if the client, we do comparison pages all the time for clients, right?
yeah.
And you have that table that has like the check boxes of what you meet and what you're good at and what you're not. You have to be real with the client to say, does the consensus online actually back up what you're claiming in this comparison page? Or, do we have to work harder off page to reinforce some of the things that are inside that comparison page in terms of the areas that you want to win? So client work is a ton of education, right? And you have to be realistic. And if those are the goals, then you have to also be talking on a long-term horizon because you can't just spam the web with 1,000 semantic triples saying you're the best at this now. It doesn't work like that. You actually need that on good sites and long-term sustained verbiage hitting the web like that, right? And really the best way to get that sustained verbiage is actually to change your product and actually influence what real users are saying so that it's not a mention push of 10 mentions a month that talk about how great you are about something, but actually changing your product and seeing people tweet about it, seeing people post on LinkedIn about it, seeing your reviews reflect that, etc.
Yeah. Does it mean before starting a campaign, we should not just review how much coverage the client has, how many reviews the client has, but how much coverage and reviews the competitors have?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that we like to do is use Appify a lot to scrape Reddit
Mm,
and get a sense of what the sentiment there is and what are their strengths, weaknesses, and where do people kind of see where are the key threads that influence a person's opinion on how well you meet this, key criteria deal breaker that's important, right? If anybody doesn't know Appify is essentially a marketplace for scrapers. So people make their own scrapers, and when things get patched, those scraper developers fix their scraper so that it can keep
mm,
doing its job. You can scrape specific threads, you can scrape mentions, you can scrape for any date or time, right? A time period. You can't scrape the whole web, obviously, but I think Reddit is a pretty good proxy because of the discussions going on there in terms of how well that's reflected. But you can also scrape basically any platform. So if you want to check Trustpilot reviews or G2 reviews or Google reviews, et cetera, you can do that. And obviously you can analyze that with AI to kind of see where you hit up against competitors.
With regards to LLM rankings, are there any on-page must-haves or guidelines to follow before you start working on your off-page consensus?
For sure. This may change, but we are in a stage where LLMs are not great at extracting all the information from a page. They need structure. So Think about your intro paragraph, first 30% of your page. That's where the LLM is most likely to get its answer, and the very end of the page. But there's this kind of muddy middle of the page that isn't really parsed or understood, so to speak. So if you think about, your own work inside an LLM, the longer you make your prompt, the less likely it is for it to be followed 100%. And be stuff in the middle there that is not going to be perfectly followed. So it's kind of the same thing when an LLM reads your page, right? So it's going to really get that first introductory portion. And then what we recommend is in the middle of the page, that's where you can put in structured tables and things like that reinforce in a structured manner how you compare or what features you have or what data you're presenting. And then that's going to be easier for the LLMs to parse because it is structured. And then, concluding with the key points that you have as well. Also, we don't like to hide things in accordion menus.
Do you mean the intro and the conclusion, the end of the article, are the most crucial parts when it comes to retrieving your information?
That's what we're seeing currently. LLMs are also improving all the time. That is probably something that they're actively working on. I talked about this on AI Notebook, where we were discussing how HubSpot wrote this great article about one triple per concept, right? So one very clear declarative sentence, subject, predicate, object to describe a concept within the article, right? You don't want to overdo that because you're going to alienate readers and it's going to sound robotic. But as you're describing different concepts about your product, basically it's advantageous for you to create one triple to represent each idea. And then you can write more naturally or cite examples or cite experience and things like that within the article. But I think, inside your article, you want to get key statements from the beginning of that, because LLMs also have limited resources and they're not going to are not going to parse a full 3,000 word article. They're going to look quickly. They're going to do their fan outs. They're going to look for the passages that support the reasoning journey the best. And what we're finding is that first 30% and the conclusion are the key areas that it's getting those passages from.
That's something interesting. I definitely want to test out. I've only been, testing around the first 30%, but didn't test when it comes to the conclusion, but I'll do my test on that. What's your take on agentic optimization? Optimizing your site for agentic use, does that improve your LLM ranking or recommendation? Does it have any effect?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So you're asking about whether it would have an effect for a user or have an advantageous effect for the agent to actually use the site, right? So I think, yeah.
Will it have an effect on the ranking?
Yeah, that's interesting. One thing I can point to, I think for sure that would be the case, is AI Mode last month. So I think it was July 2026, actually is now supporting MCP. I think Canva was one of the first to support, and I think maybe Spotify or something. I don't remember what, but I definitely know Canva for sure. Basically, you can go to AI Mode and say, I want to create a advertisement for my garage sale, and just start talking, and then it's going to open Canvas. The companies that get in early with that, they're going to have a tremendous advantage because AI Mode wants to compete with Claude. They want to compete with ChatGPT to be that interface that ignites the conversation for a person to use that tool, right? So I think if that person has that MCP connected, very likely going to get that MCP as a recommendation because it's essentially frictionless for them to create what they want, right? Seeing that happen in Google AI Mode is super interesting, and something that's going to make them sticky and compete more with these LLMs that have kind of got a bit of a head start with that. I think WebMCP, even though it's early days, Google announced that February 2026, the declarative implementation of WebMCP, where you're essentially labeling forms. I think that can potentially give the LLM an indication of what are the different actions that you can take on the website. And the declarative implementation is fairly easy. Whether markdown pages and things like that, I think that the general advice has been not to do those and just structure your site in a way that's good technical SEO and parsable and things not hidden in accordion menus and things like that. So I think optimizing for agents at this point, while it's a minority of searches, it's kind of like technical SEO best practices, and that might help you rank better for a fan out, thus improve your rankings. But I think the the MCP support in Google AI mode is something to watch out for, because also if you are ranking well and you get your client ranked and then that person hooks up their MCP so that they can start their Canva chat from Google AI mode, you've kind of won very high LTV customer because they're going to be front and center and connected with their Google account.
Do you think listicles are still as effective as they were beginning of this year?
Yes. What we've noticed is that listicles have diminished in their importance in terms of rankings. We've had several SERPs where we had a really great run with some self-promotional listicles on page, and Google has now changed the intent to rank home pages. So we've kind of had to reorient from those listicles. I think this kind of boils down to some conversations around Glenn Alsop's article about listicles dominating AI search to some of Lily Ray's, public criticisms and getting Google involved in those things. I think Google has made some changes. In terms of Google rankings, we are seeing fewer self-promotional listicles, but that's not holding true across every LLM surface. And listicles in general are going to give you that co-citation with the other competitors in your niche so that inside the training data, your token for your brand is close to the other brands. And then it's also about the claims that surround your embedding around your brand in terms of what the LLM, attributes to you, right? So I think there's a diminished importance in terms of Google for the self-promotional listicles, getting those clicks and those conversions, but page listicles still putting you in the right neighborhoods inside the training data and still getting cited more often in ChatGPT than Google.
And what are some other off-page content types that you think is still helpful?
I think one thing to note about the listicles is it doesn't have to just be best project management software, but it can be more tuned, right? So best project management software for freelance marketing, design, freelance graphic design companies or stuff like that. So talking about the ICP inside those off-page listicles is going to help you attract that user when they're searching, because each LLM has the user embedding on the person. It knows that both of us are SEOs. It knows that my accountant is an accountant, et cetera, right? So when it searches for solutions about something that's more broad, it's going to look for project management software to help people who own an agency, or a totally different type of project management software to help an accountant, for example, right? In terms of other off-page listicles, I would sort of start with going a little bit more niche versus just the others. But also, if you're able to get more reviews for certain things, I think that's also could be considered an off-page form of content that you can incentivize for different types of reviews that back up your claims. I think just even getting press coverage on different announcements and things that you're doing, press releases that then actually translate into real articles are great. Podcasts, even the transcript from the podcast could be considered another form of off-page content. I think that we just have to kind of detach this thinking that off-page content is a guest blog and what can you put in this guest blog, but off-page content being essentially multimodal now, right? And really thinking about that in terms of, PR and wider presence and doing interviews like this and things like that.
Yeah. My last question. What are some black hat strategies that you've come across? I'm not saying you are doing it, but that you've discovered or you've come across some
Yeah.
other brands doing it.
There was a recent one that was discussed by, I think his name is Malt from Peak AI, where he was saying that they were essentially searching the fan outs were searching for the brand name, and people are buying domains that seem like it's the brand. So it would be like, instead of brand.com, it would be like getbrand.com and things like this. And that being as if it were the actual brand. So that kind of is super scary. And I think The problem that we run into is that, LLMs are not just search engines, right? Google, obviously, like being concerned with search quality and search integrity and all these things, but ChatGPT probably putting more resources in terms of, and Claude putting more resources in terms of let's write good code, let's do good design,
Mm,
create great images. The search experience is not their priority at this point.
priority.
They also very much have to think about their subscription base, right? And why are people subscribing to Claude? It's not just because they're using it to do buying decisions, because they're using skills,
Mm,
because they're using projects, it's because they're using MCPs, they're writing codes, building websites, building tools, right? Their engineering resources are not 100% focused on search quality experience or ad experience, right? So there are going to be more black hat ways that are probably methods that are probably going to last longer for these specific LLMs because they don't have search quality teams evaluating things like Google would, right? So I think it's a bit scarier in terms of what's possible. I mean, depends on your perspective whether
yeah.
scary or it's an opportunity. But I think when it comes to LLMs where search is not a primary component, you will see things like what I mentioned, this black hat idea about almost creating a fake brand site that gets cited, being under the radar of these companies for longer.
Yeah. Steve, thank you so much. We can go on for hours, but thank you so much for these insights. Besides SEO Notebook, where can people get more insights from you or what you've been publishing?
So there's two newsletters, AInotebook.com, which is focused on answer engine optimization, and then SEOnotebook.com, which is focused, also on AEO, but more traditional SEO, technical SEO, AI overviews. There's good overlap between the two, but essentially I publish those two weekly. And then we have notebook.agency, which is my agency that services B2B SaaS brands primarily and offers answer engine optimization.
And you have a conference coming up as well, right?
Yes, I do. And you're speaking at it. So we're super excited to have you. That's SEO
Yeah.
IRL happening October 6th and 7th in Toronto.
Thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate your time. Thank
All
you.
right. Yeah. Thanks for having me.